too many observers reason as if intentions automatically translate directly into outcomes. And then you of all people go on to quote approvingly from Friedrich Engels, Karl Marx's co-author in the Communist Manifesto, and he has this phrase, what emerges, that Engels makes the argument, intentions don't matter as much as, quote, what emerges.
Yes.
You use that, so explain that.
Well, what Engels says is that what each person wills is obstructed by everyone else, and what emerges is something that no one will.
Right.
And so you can't go from intentions to results. And as if to emphasize that, I later go into the question of South Africa under apartheid, so that we don't get it and bogged down in the question of how much racism there is and so forth, because it's unambiguous.
Right.
That
state policy.
Yes, it's state policy. It's the law. And yet there were industries in South Africa under apartheid where there were more blacks hired than whites in occupations where it was illegal to hire blacks at all. And that part of the problem that the people who were imposing apartheid had was that there's money to be made by hiring black workers. And so whatever the racial views of the employer, he's thinking about the money.
Right.
And so you get all these anomalies. And of course, my colleague and friend Walter Williams, when he did research in South Africa for 3 months, and he lived in an area that was set aside for whites only. So that even in the housing market, you had this kind of thing. And at least one area in South Africa, non-whites were a majority in one of the areas set aside for whites only. And again, it's the cost of the discrimination. And you get that with minimum wage arguments as well, that if you have a minimum wage, then that's set above where it would be in a free market. Then that means you're going to have more people applying because there's a higher wage, and there are going to be fewer people hired because of the higher wage. Right. And so you're going to have a chronic surplus of applicants. Right. Now, in a market where there's, say, a chronic surplus of qualified people of, say, 200, and there are 100 blacks, for example, who are qualified, and then if the employer refuses to hire all 100 black qualified people, he still has 200 others he can call on, and that's it. It's cost him nothing. But if there's no minimum wage now, and there's no chronic surplus, every time he turns away a qualified black person, he has to have someone who's not black, who's also qualified, that he can hire. And
he may not be able to find that person.
At that price. Therefore, the price will have to go up, and so it's costing him. And if he doesn't raise the price, he's going to have to keep his customers waiting because he doesn't have enough people to do the job.
Got it. So this question of the difference between intentions and what emerges,
yes.
A couple of illustrations from the American experience that you describe in the book. In the American South after the Civil War, whites employed a number of measures to keep down the earnings of black workers and sharecroppers, keep them poor.
Yes.
And yet you write, quote, black incomes in 1900 were almost half again higher than they had been in 1867 to 68, in other words, just after the Civil War, after African Americans received their freedom. This represented a rate of growth higher than that in the American economy as a whole. Yeah. Just freed slaves improved their material well-being faster than the rest of the nation, yes. in spite of laws intended to keep them down. How come?
Well, it wasn't so much laws in this case, it was agreements.
Agreements, I'm sorry.
And many of these agreements simply fell apart because, especially in agriculture, because as the spring comes in, you've got to get yourself a workforce out there to plow that ground and plant the seeds. Otherwise, there's no crop.
You lose a whole season, right?
Yeah, so the people who decided they weren't going to stick by the landowners, they weren't going to stick by this agreement, they got the first dibs on the black workers and sharecroppers, and the others had to take what was left over. Okay. And they got away with a lot of really terrible cheating the first year or so. But of course, by experience, the guy who was cheated the first year knows that his cousin is getting paid more next door. You don't need to read about that. You don't need anything else. You go down where your cousin's working.
Got it. Again, discrimination and disparities. 3 decades after the end of slavery, laws mandating racially segregated seating in municipal transit vehicles began to be passed in many Southern communities. This didn't happen immediately
Yeah.
after the Civil War. It's toward the end of the 19th century. Municipal transit companies fought
Yeah.
such laws. How come?
Yeah, they may have had exactly the same racial views as the people who passed the law, but the people who passed the laws paid no price for it. The people who owned the transit companies, see, the votes, only whites could vote, but whites and blacks could both supply money.
Right.
And so the incentives were very different from the people who owned transit companies than they were for politicians.